what I usually do is I say, give me a minute to collect my thoughts. We had someone say to Dad and me, someone said to Dad and me on Facebook, they said, Johnny, why don't you try to go out and teaching the lost? Well, if you're watching this right now and I'm about to talk about brotherhood politics, I just spent an hour talking to people on live television about the Lord's kingdom and that Jesus is king and that it doesn't matter about presidents. That's, the bottom of our total pole is the president. We need to be looking at Jesus. So I'm talking to the lost folk all the time. Dad was just in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, talking to the lost folk. We have brethren in the local community that are, the local congregation that are involved in talking to lost folk. But in the same breath that I can say to lost people in America that they need to stop putting their trust into civil politicians, then I think I ought to be able to then turn to my brethren and say, and my brethren need to stop putting blind trust into religious politicians. When you look at the Bible, what do we have? We have evangelists, we have deacons, we have elders. But somehow, brethren think that they just get to create this extra office that God did not ordain, and it's called director. Y'all, the directors of these schools don't have a thing to do with what happens in local congregations. They have nothing to do with what God said for the mission of the church. But y'all keep thinking, like, well, what are we going to do without the schools of preaching? Heritage Christian University, Kirk Brothers, down in Alabama. Will Hanstein, Knoxville, Tennessee, Southeast Institute of Biblical Studies. B.J. Clark, Memphis School of Preaching, Memphis, Tennessee. Y'all, we are in a deep mess of Ephesians 5:11. Have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. And I'm going to read quotes out of this book tonight that was written by B.J. Clark, What a Fellowship, 1992, and just say he is absolutely not practicing. Now, it comes down to two things, okay? Are you opposed to women preachers? I am, because the New Testament is. Just don't find any authority for instrumental music in worship. I say that. I don't find it. I find a lot of singing, but the idea of adding instruments is just that, it's adding. Well, the individuals that we're having a problem with, usually, I'm saying what it boils down to is folk need to wake up and do some research. Pepperdine. If you go speak at the Pepperdine lectures, you're going to have instrumental music and you're going to have women preachers. Okay. I mean, it's that simple. And so then what ought to be the idea of fellowship is, well, then what we're not going to do is we're not going to have Pepperdine speakers who support instrumental music and women preachers, and they refuse to speak out against it. We're not going to be inviting them to our events. So it makes no sense for Oklahoma Christian to promote themselves as a sound college. And then they invite all these Pepperdine speakers. Harding in Searcy, Arkansas. It makes no sense for them to parade as sound, and then they invite Pepperdine speakers, Phil Brookman, Jim McGuigan. And those men, when they go out to Pepperdine, do not speak out against instrumental music or women preachers. They just go there, go along, get along to go along, whatever. And these men are not saying anything about the Lipscomb University in Nashville. Lipscomb speakers that get to come over, and they're basically bringing in the idea of women preachers and instrumental music. Now, here's the quote. Now, I want to say this too, the fellowship talks. When Dad and I started having these fellowship talks via this platform, it used to be like shocking, sounding the alarm. Now it's just basically an update of y'all's mess that you don't appear to try to be doing any better with. It's just, here's the most recent current events of how y'all are not abiding by your own teachings. Here's what B.J. Clark said in 1992. This is page 56 of the book, What a Fellowship. A fourth manifestation of practicing withdrawal fellowship would be a major reduction in the number of false teachers circulating unmolested throughout the brotherhood today. As already pointed out, the scriptures demand that we mark, withdraw from, and refuse to bid Godspeed to false teachers. Instead, many praise and invite such false teachers of our day to come and speak on workshops, lectureships, youth days, or gospel meetings. Imagine what a tremendous impact could be made if the elders charged with the oversight of the preachers pulled the plug on them and removed them from the pulpits because of their false stands. We must quit providing false teachers with a forum for propagating their erroneous doctrines. That's B.J. Clark from 1992, but in 2023 he shared the pulpit with 4 Pepperdine speakers. And it wasn't just him. Steve Higginbotham was at Freed-Hardeman. He shared the pulpit with 4. Every at Memphis take those credits over to FHU and then finish their degree. Money, money, money. Degrees cost money. Well, back then he was able to basically speak freely because he didn't have all that political agenda behind him. And he also said this: while it is true that a Christian college is not the church, the members who lead these academic institutions are still members of the Lord's church, and thus bound by scriptures to refuse to fellowship false teachers who have been legitimately marked. He just said it doesn't matter. Like someone said, I was at a college. It's Oklahoma College. B.J. Clark said that doesn't matter. Phil Brookman is a member of the church who needs to be marked and avoided. It doesn't matter that you just happen to assemble at Freed-Hardeman College with 4 Pepperdine speakers. Well, that was 1992 B.J. Clark, when he was not the director of the Memphis School of Preaching. He had all that political agenda that had to going on. He just said, look, the colleges are not the church. The colleges are not the church, but when they want to raise money, they sure act like they're the church. And when they start doing stupid stuff, that's when they say, wait, Title IX? We're not the church. You need to look up what Title IX is. We're not the church. We're a liberal arts college. I tell you, one of the worst books that I ever read was by James Bales, where he was making an argument for the college. Like he was making an argument to support the college out of the church treasury. And James Bales was saying it's the college is an extension of the home. And he said, therefore, it's our God-given obligation to fund the college because our kids are in the... Kids? These kids could be going to war. They're not kids. Your job is done. Well, we need to support out of the church treasury. Well, how did the church treasury get involved in your child's extra schooling? One of the worst books I ever read. Now, I like a lot of James Bale's stuff. I don't like his marriage and divorce stuff, and I don't like his Holy Spirit stuff. But there's a bunch of books that he wrote that are good. But one of the worst books I ever read was James Bale's trying to call the college an extension of the home. Now, here's where I say B.J. preaches it. He doesn't even preach it anymore. 1992 he preached it, but now he's not even practicing it at all. Curtis, that's what I said the other day, Curtis Cates is rolling in his grave to have a sunset speaker on the Memphis School of Preaching. I talked to a man, and he was talking about Dan Winkler's sermon at the Memphis School of Preaching, and he was telling everybody it was a good sermon and whatever. And so I showed this information to him, and I said, well, what do you think about Dan going down to Sunset? And he said, Caleb, I graduated from Memphis 20 years ago, and he said, I don't know very much about Sunset. 20 years ago, B.J. Clark isn't even a Memphis grad. 20 years ago, that means that man was going through the Curtis Cates time frame. 20 years ago, Curtis Cates. How did you come out of Memphis and you don't know about Sunset? And this is a moment where I say the schools of preaching are not giving us anything for our dollar. If you talk about return of investment, they do not tell about the problematic things. These people come out not knowing anything. Ignorance is always the game plan. I don't know about Sunset. And I said, well, okay, you don't know about Sunset, forget it. What do you know about Pepperdine? Nothing. Y'all remember Wayne Jackson? He's dead. Divorce and Remarriage, a study discussion between Wayne Jackson and Truman Scott. Who's Truman Scott? Truman Scott has served as a missionary in Italy, worked with several congregations. Currently, he is teaching in Sunset School of Preaching in Lubbock, Texas. When you read this book, Divorce and Remarriage, Truman Scott from Sunset takes false doctrine on marriage and divorce. When you're going to find more documents where they're promoting the idea more of leaning towards direct operation. And not, just look at this. When you go to the Sunset YouTube, Sunset International Bible Institute, you look at their videos and you select the tab for most popular. Do you know what you're going to get? Their second most popular video at Sunset is Keith Lancaster, who is a Pepperdine regular. Keith Lancaster. Look up Keith Lancaster Acapella and Pepperdine University. And then look up Keith Lancaster at Oklahoma Christian University and see all the people, Royce Money, from Abilene. It's Ephesians 5:11. Are you going to reprove anything, or are you just going to keep blindly fellowshipping false doctrines? Number 2 most popular video at Sunset is Keith Lancaster, a Pepperdine personality. You keep going on, who are you going to get next? You're going to get Jim McGuigan. Again, after Keith Lancaster, sandwiched. Keith Lancaster, Jim McGuigan. Jim McGuigan is a Pepperdine speaker. Keith Lancaster right next to it. Look, if you're looking at Sunset, you're talking about Pepperdine sympathizers. And I can't tell you how many recent graduates of Sunset that I've talked to where they just say the church is a denomination, they're fine with instrumental music, and they don't have a problem with women preachers at Pepperdine. If that's what Sunset is, how does Dan Winkler get to go there 2 months ago and speak? And now here's what someone else said about Dan Winkler being at Sunset. Well, maybe Dan doesn't know what's going on at Sunset. Dan's not that ignorant, okay? He might play like he's ignorant, which is what everybody's doing. I don't know what they do down there. He knows exactly what Sunset has been doing for years. Dan knows. And then someone says, well, maybe Dan went down there to teach the gospel. These are brethren, y'all. Who do you think is lost in the audience? And lost people are not coming to lectureships. Lectureships are for us few, nobody new. Well, maybe he's down there to teach the gospel. This is not an evangelistic meeting. This is a convention. And then someone says, well, if there's false doctrine, maybe Dan Winkler opposed it. Dan Winkler's not that guy. Okay? Dan Winkler's going to come in and give y'all dish soap, soft rag, just feel good. He's not going to come in and rebuke. Okay? He's not going to reprove, rebuke with all, 2 Timothy 4. He's not going to do that. And you know why? Because he does know exactly what he's doing. He wants to get his foot into the Sunset door so he can keep another foot at Memphis and then have a foot at FHU. This man is doing exactly what he wants to do, which is playing the meeting circuit, the lectureship circuit. The more your name gets out there, the more you have opportunities to get the money that these people are putting out. I showed you the stats from PTP the other day. The amount of percentage that they get in money out of 1 week, all the money they get in 1 week, and how much of it goes to their speakers. It's a money-making event. Now, B.J. Clark, Sunset, Keith Lancaster, Jim McGuigan at Sunset, and then Dan Winkler's down there. That is Ephesians 5:11. It is absolutely contrary to BJ's 1992 article. What a fellowship. Well, here's what I said about Dan Winkler being at Sunset. I said, well, maybe Dan Winkler went to Sunset because Phil Sanders is telling everybody to go to Sunset. Here's an ad in the Christian Chronicle for the Sunset Bible Institute, and here's a quote down at the bottom. Sunset International Bible Institute has for generations served the Lord and churches of Christ by training preachers and soul winners that have reached many nations with the gospel truth. I am thankful for their continuing efforts for the cause of Christ. Signed, Phil Sanders. They were doing all this, Phil Sanders, when they were bringing in Keith Lancaster and Jim McGuigan and a handful of others. Like, that's not even everybody. So I said, well, maybe Dan did this on Phil Sanders' say-so. It's a problem, y'all, that Phil Sanders gets to promote Sunset. It's a problem that Dan Winkler gets to go speak at Sunset, not to correct anything. He goes down there and speaks at Sunset, and then he just comes over to Memphis School of Preaching. And when I said that, I said Phil Sanders promoting Sunset while speaking at PTP. And a fella came on and he said, hey, Caleb, just so you know, Phil Sanders did not speak at PTP in 2023. Somebody put on Facebook recently, I've had the quote on the screen, I just forgot to do it. Somebody said publicly on Facebook to me and Dad directly, they said, Johnny, Evan Diaz got GBN to take Phil Sanders off of all their programming. Evan Diaz, South Seminole, Florida, got GBN to remove Phil Sanders. Well, I had been told that. And then this man told me, hey, Phil was on the list to be at PTP, but he didn't actually go. Well, why? I said, why? He said, I don't know. And then I said, well, this is kind of like, why did B.J. Clark not go speak at FHU this February? In 2023, B.J. Clark was on the FHU lectureship with 4 Pepperdine speakers. If he had gone this year, he would have been on with 3. Did B.J. not go to FHU out of conviction? or was it just coincidence that he didn't go? So this man tells me Phil Sanders didn't actually preach at PTP in 2023. So then we start saying, was there some conviction brewing in PTP? Did PTP find out that Phil Sanders, the Edmond congregation, brings in Phil Brookman, a Pepperdine speaker? Did they figure that out? Did they say, man, Phil Sanders' preacher Randy Roper has spoke on Pepperdine lectures. He didn't correct anything. So did they get some conviction over at PTP and they said to Phil Sanders, hey, we're not inviting you until you start clearing up your associations with Pepperdine? Did they get conviction? No. Phil Sanders just got COVID. I tested negative. This is August 19th, 2023. I tested negative on Wednesday for COVID, flu, RSV, and strep. They told me I had respiratory infection. I was given some medication. After 4 days, I'm not better. My headache is severe. On and on and on. Thanks to Gary Hampton for covering for me. Look what he says. Phil Sanders says, I am missing PTP greatly. Oh, Phil Sanders, he praises PTP. You know what else Phil Sanders praises? Sunset School of Preaching in Lubbock, Texas, where they used Keith Lancaster and Jim McGuig. And you guys are not serious like I did in the Ezekiel class. You're not standing in the gap. You're not watching anything. Jason Rollo said, I have every confidence in B.J. Clark at the Memphis School of Preaching. Well, Jason Rollo has every confidence in B.J. Clark, while B.J. Clark lets a sunset speaker come in. Can Dan Winkler, as a sunset speaker, come to the Texas School of Preaching? This is where I said before, Texas School of Preaching is the newest school on the block. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. No one is touching this stuff, and it's getting worse. Now, Phil Sanders. Here's, what's his name? Kirk Brothers. I got an email from one of Kirk Brothers' students. And he asked me about, the fact that Kirk Brothers went out to California. He said, I went to a California school for whatever. And I said, we all know it's Pepperdine. So why did he not take a moment instead of telling everybody, look, Pepperdine is not sound. Don't go out there. Don't be sending people out there. He said, I was there for the president's meeting or whatever. So this is what the email says. You sought to publicly correct Kirk Brothers concerning his visit to Pepperdine campus. The correction seemed to be based on him vaguely describing the school rather than making direct corrections concerning their teachings. I suppose some context might be helpful. I attended Heritage for some time, and both Kirk and the staff made it very clear what was being taught. Let me zoom out a little bit. If it's small font for you, forgive me. Taught at some of the schools, including Pepperdine, was wrong. But when it came to chapel following the visit, he did not directly address the error. Now here's my thing. Chapel got broadcasted out on the internet. And he didn't touch the Pepperdine problem. Where did he talk about Pepperdine? Behind closed doors, in private, back room, in the shadows. There are no walls to my classroom. When I get in the classroom and I start saying this stuff, everybody has opportunity to hear it. I'm not hiding. My dad is not hiding. Y'all will not abide by y'all's old writings and you just stick behind four walls with your itty-bitty classrooms. When it came to chapel, he did not directly address the error as the error is addressed year-round at Heritage. So this student admits he's aware that error is at Pepperdine. Hey man, you're a student at Heritage, you know more than Jason Rollo. Jason Rollo, directing the School of Preaching down in Texas, he told me, I don't know what they're doing at Pepperdine. It's just a school in California. Good for you, man. Does this context change the correction? Or does every single time Kirk talks about a trip that he took in order to edify the students, he has to call out the false teachings taught in the area? I don't know why he wouldn't. That's Ephesians 5:11. Well, sometimes I reprove and sometimes I just don't. And he says, you've made a distinction between correction and disfellowship, rightly so. When then do you believe correction should translate to disfellowship? Freed Hardeman, as you said, has had Pepperdine speakers multiple times, even following it being called out. Boy, he's paying attention. Boy, should then Freed be disfellowshipped? It's strange to talk about disfellowshipping a school, in my opinion, but for the sake of discussion, please permit it. Kirk Brothers has attended the Brotherhood Schools meetings for a few years now. Should he be disfellowshipped since he doesn't publicly correct the erring schools during chapel, even though he does in private with the students? Y'all, Jason Rollo might be ignorant, but this student is on the ball. They do everything in back room. Pepperdine speakers got to come to Freed-Hardeman even after it had been addressed. Hey, put this dude in charge of GBN. He's paying attention. He says, none of these schools are the church, so what do we do? B.J. Clark has an answer to that. While it is true that the college is not the church, the members who lead these academic institutions are still members of the Lord's church, and thus bound by Scripture to refuse to fellowship false teachers who have been legitimately marked. So B.J. Clark just took care of that. This student admits Kirk Brothers does not talk about the error in public. He only does it behind the four walls of his small classroom. Our classroom has no walls. We're doing this publicly. I'll reverse the question. He says, when should we do it? And I'm basically saying this. If the student already acknowledges that Freed-Hardeman has been made aware that they have all these Pepperdine speakers and they just keep doing it, and everybody else who calls themselves sound, who's not on staff at Freed-Hardeman, they just keep going back, he says, when do we withdraw from them? And I ask you, how long do we just keep letting this go? That's what everybody wants to do. Well, how far are you going to take this? How close are you going to let it get to you? Because the Pepperdine speakers are in your room. Y'all, Kirk Brothers, a compromiser. He said, I have to raise $1 million every year for Heritage University down in Alabama. He is a compromiser. He is not just going out to be with all of the, quote, colleges, no matter how liberal they are. He is bringing them to Alabama. The Better Conference, April 8th and 9th, 2024, Heritage Christian University. Speakers include Ralph Gilmore, Dale Jenkins, and Ty Rhymes, and David Shannon, and more. Now, give me one moment. The Red River Family Encampment. Look what you have. If you can see it, I'll find it for you. So at the Red River Family Encampment, this is what you're going to have. Here is Orpheus Heyward, right? Right underneath Orpheus Heyward, Wes McAdams, Chris McCurley, Ralph Gilmore. Let me find it here. Here is Orpheus Heyward.
This last episode that Clayton mentioned some years ago had launched me into a series of pressures that I couldn't handle. And when I decided to teach what I consider truth about the restoration movement and the extent of the body of Christ, and to teach that instruments are not sinful in the context of assembly.
Orpheus Heyward is now saying that he's just saying the church is a denomination. He's saying that there are folk basically in the denominations and they're Christians. He's saying instrumental music is okay. Where does he go? Look, y'all. Call him the new Max Lucado. That's how Max Lucado got his start. Call him the new Rubel Shelley, because that's basically in 1984, that was the direction Rubel was going in. 1984, he still didn't want instrumental music. But here's my point in Red River. You have Orpheus Heyward in fellowship with Jeff Jenkins. Now, when you go over here, you have Orpheus Heyward in fellowship with Ralph Gilmore. And what is Kirk Brothers doing? He's bringing Ralph Gilmore, who's fellowshipping Orpheus Heyward, and he's bringing Ralph to Heritage in Alabama. Now, someone says, well, Caleb, you got Jeff Jenkins, and it says Dale Jenkins. Look who's doing this. To view the schedule and register, visit the Jenkins Institute. Jeff Jenkins, go back to this video. Jeff Jenkins at the Red River Family Encampment, fellowshipping Orpheus Heyward. Orpheus is a Pepperdine speaker where he did not rebuke women preachers or instrumental music. Kirk Brothers is an informed compromiser. It's not that he doesn't know. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's bringing David Shannon. David Shannon brings in 4 Pepperdine speakers to the 2023 FHU lectures. David Shannon spoke on the Harding lectures with a number of Pepperdine speakers himself. Phil Brookman, to be one of them. These men don't care. They're taking your money, $1 million every year, taking your money, and they're bringing the other compromisers in. Let us all have the same purse, the book of Proverbs says. Now, blind trust. I already talked about Phil Sanders, right? You know, Phil Sanders isn't practicing what he used to teach either. Here's a younger version of Phil Sanders. He said the Corinthians were bragging when they should have been ashamed. They should have recognized that their tolerance for such sin would have made them partakers in it. If you're not correcting it, younger Phil Sanders said, if you're not correcting it, you're taking part in it. Well, he's sending people to Sunset now. His preacher, Randy Roper, spoke on Pepperdine, where he didn't correct women preachers' instrumental music. The congregation in Edmond, Oklahoma, invites Phil Brookman over from Memorial Drive, and Phil Brookman is a Pepperdine speaker who does not correct women preachers or instrumental music. And then there's Phil Sanders just taking it. Now what he's doing is what he used to he's tolerating it, and now he's a partaker in it. Doesn't matter to East Tennessee. Bring him in. Here's Will Hanstein, compromiser. Southwest was pleased to attend the luncheon for In Search of the Lord's Way. We enjoyed a good meal and listened to Brother Phil Sanders speak on the good work that's being done. Phil Sanders, a compromiser, sending people to Sunset with Keith Lancaster, Jim McGuigan, and a handful of other Pepperdine speakers and Pepperdine sympathizers. What does Pepperdine equal out to? Instrumental music, women preachers. What does Oklahoma equal out to? Abilene got a woman preacher on staff in the Bible department, y'all. Will Hanstein not saying a thing about it? Maybe in a closed room with a handful of dudes he does. They don't say anything about it open. You know, it's not the student from Heritage. He said, do you ever try to talk to all kinds of these people? Yes, I've seen Will Hanstein face to face, and we asked him about Freed Hardeman. No comment. The director of the East Tennessee School of Preaching. No comment. Bold. That's what he's given to the students. When you get in there, no comment. Why? Because we want to leave Knoxville, and we want to go to Freed Hardeman, and we want to get a bachelor's degree. Greg Tidwell? That's Greg Tidwell. He's a part of the problem. He is the previous editor of Gospel Advocate. And when David Shannon was speaking at Harding with a bunch of Pepperdine speakers, Greg Tidwell was also speaking with those Pepperdine speakers. They didn't correct any of it. Compromisers across the board. Here's another one. Aaron Gallagher is compromising. So, you got Jeff Jenkins fellowshipping Orpheus. Now remember, the statement was made to me, made to my dad publicly. The public statement was, anybody could have seen it, the public statement was, Evan Diaz talked GBN into removing Phil Sanders from any type of dealings with them. Well, Aaron is going to go over to Knoxville, Tennessee, and they just hosted Phil Sanders. Okay, so is Aaron going to go in? And here's the thing, it's publicly displayed that they are in fellowship with Phil Sanders. It is publicly displayed that Aaron Gallagher is going to go in. And what are we going to get out of it? If he says anything, it will be backroom. It will be just like Kirk Brothers. Well, Kirk Brothers doesn't say it in chapel, but when we get in the classroom, he's going to say it. Aaron could go in and he could correct Jeff Jenkins for fellowshipping Orpheus Heyward at the Red River Family Encampment. He could go in and he could say, Jeff Jenkins is a FHU speaker. He shared the pulpit with 4 Pepperdine speakers in 23. He shared it with 3 Pepperdine speakers a couple months ago in February. Sure, Aaron could go in and he could publicly say, y'all, we're getting out of control with our Pepperdine speakers, and Jeff Jenkins is part of the problem. He could do that. He could put out a public statement and says, because East Tennessee keeps on fellowshipping Phil Sanders and they keep using Jeff Jenkins, I'm not going. But right now, the evidence that we have is that he's compromising. He's going to go in, fellowship with Jeff Jenkins, who fellowships with Orpheus Heyward at the Red River Family Encampment. He's a Pepperdine speaker. And just forget Orpheus. He fellowships with 3 Pepperdine speakers at Freed Hardeman. Y'all are out of control. You're compromising all over the place. Let me conclude this way. The email asked me, Caleb, why do you go after the big fish? So I talked about all the directors. I talked about all the schools, and I talked about Phil Sanders and Greg Tidwell, and I put Aaron on the screen, got Orpheus on the screen, and the student says, why do you go after the big fish? And I said, who do you Who you want me to put on the screen? Someone that no one knows? Okay. I will oblige the heritage student. I'll put on the screen people that you don't know. I am going to talk to you now about nepotism, compromise, and money. It's disgusting. People you don't know. I'm scrolling through Facebook, and I spot a Wednesday night Bible class that's being taught on adultery. So I click it. It's being taught by a man named Blake Hawkins. Blake Hawkins is an educated man. He's a family man, but he has not been through a brotherhood school of preaching. So I have there no SOP, no school of preaching. And he teaches a Bible class on adultery that is filled, I like this, filled with Old Testament information. Someone says, we're Christians, we're not under the Old Testament. Look, it's a good idea to get God's long-standing view of adultery. Malachi chapter 2 says he hates it. And they had rulings to respect marriage in the Old Testament. That was the idea. The people had hard hearts. Book of Proverbs talks about adultery. It was filled with Old Testament literature. That's very good. But he's a non-SOP, non-school of preaching, and he's teaching the Bible class on adultery. Jacket and a tie. He looks like the preacher, but he's actually not on staff. The email asked me, Caleb, why don't you talk about people that no one knows? Why are you always talking about the directors and the politicians? We all know them. Talk about people that no one knows. Here's Ryan McAllister. He's one of my former classmates at the Memphis School of Preaching. He is an SOP. He's been through a 2-year brotherhood school. He's been trained by B.J. Clark, and he's been trained by Keith Mosier, and he's been trained by Bobby Liddell, and he's been trained by Billy Bland. You know, if you'll look at it, it's a great big fat book. It's called The Encyclopedia of the Stone Campbell Movement. And if you will look in their section for schools of preaching, do you know what they'll say about Memphis? They'll say Memphis has, for a long time, Memphis School of Preaching has marketed themselves as the most militant school that the Brotherhood has. Ryan McAllister is a graduate of the most militant school, like I said, taught by B.J. Clark, taught by Keith Mosier, Billy Bland, Bobby Liddell, and Dan Cates. I'm not a betting man. But I would wager that Ryan McAllister has never taught a Bible class on adultery. At least not at Luxahoma. So you got the non-staff man who has not been to a school of preaching teaching on a controversial topic, a tense topic. And then you got the Memphis grad. Is he going to do it? Blake looks like the preacher, but he's not. And Ryan comes in and he just looks like he's on the construction crew. And hey, he's a Memphis man. When you go through Memphis, you wear a jacket and a tie. You don't want to do it, don't go to Memphis. We don't know these people, and you didn't say anything substantive. Okay, these are people we don't know. I didn't say anything substantive. Here's the substance. Ryan got the same education I got. And big fish, little fish, right? Big fish in a little pond, come on. Big fish, little fish. I've never gotten any help on the fellowship conversation from Ryan McAllister. He got the same education I got. So when I talk about Ephesians 5:11, he knows Ephesians 5:11 like I know. He should, like I know Ephesians 5:11. You go into the Memphis lobby, the Memphis School of Preaching lobby has 2 Timothy 4:2 on the floor. Preach the word, be in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long-suffering and doctrine. They don't reprove and rebuke, but like I'm saying, he had to see that plaque in the floor every day like I did. Reprove and rebuke. I've never heard him make a peep about any of this fellowship conversation, and I tell you why. Ryan's dad is an elder at the Forest Hill congregation that houses the Memphis School of Preaching. Ryan will never say anything controversial that's going to cause problems for his dad, an elder at the school. Nepotism, compromise, money. Y'all, the schools are in bed with each other. They do not care where you go. You finish up at Memphis, they don't care where you go. They just hope you keep sending in your student dues and you come back to the lectureship. They want to pay the folk. You know, when I was a student there, they'd be having lunch and just start taking up a random collection. someone get at the podium in the cafeteria, make an announcement about something. Now we're all pulling our billfolds out. No. His dad, he went through Memphis. His dad is an elder at Forest Hill. Now here's the second one. Well, I don't know that I'd call that nepotism. Here's Evan Manning. He's my former classmate at the Memphis School of Preaching. Evan Manning and his wife Mallory were married in 2018. They are surrounded by loving family members at the Forest Hill Church of Christ. They have attended for many years. Evan is a 2013 Memphis School of Preaching graduate and worked in health and fitness industry prior. Mallory, his wife, is Keith McAllister's daughter. In school, Ryan and Evan were best friends. It's a joke, y'all. It's absolute nepotism. Evan just shared the pulpit. I'm saying he's on staff at Forest Hill, and they just brought in a sunset speaker, Dan Winkler. Evan got the same education that I got off of B.J. Clark, Bobby Liddell, Billy Bland, Dan Cates, and Keith Mosier. He's not going to say anything. Why? Because the money. Because of his father-in-law. Because of his brother-in-law who preaches and teaches just down the road. It is a machine. It's a system. And it's like, they haven't hurt me. Do y'all remember the story that B.J. Clark put me out of the Memphis School of Preaching? That didn't hurt. I'm saying within 14 days, I was picked up by a second school. That didn't hurt me. I was doing just fine. And then after that, 6 months later, Drew was my best friend. Drew left Memphis, and he left Memphis because the teachers, the staff, Keith Mosier and B.J. Clark would not make a stand against Barry Grider. Barry Grider tell the whole class that he's going to fellowship his father who's an adulterer. He made no bones about it. So Drew tells Keith Mosier and Barry, they do nothing about it. So Drew leaves the school. Hey, man, he came with me to Tri-Cities. I was doing great. Had my best friend. We still lived together. He and I were roommates at Memphis. Drew Leonard and I were Memphis roommates. Then he came to Tri-Cities. We were roommates all over again. I was doing fantastic. I've got no ill will against B.J. Clark. He put me up with Wesley Simons, man. I was doing well. But then I just kept going. And I just kept seeing what I'm telling you about. The money, the compromise, the false doctrine. You say, Bible says brotherhood. This is buddyhood. Hey. Folk teaching the same sermon, just lazy teaching the same sermons. I heard John D. Berry teach the same sermon at Memphis and then go over to Pulaski where Paul Sane was. Teach the same, lazy, teach the same sermon. Someone said, what's his name? I just said it. Someone said, John D. Berry, a busy man. Someone invited my dad. My dad did a sermon on grace at the Portland Lectures, and then another fella in charge of a Texas lectureship called my dad. He said, hey, come over and preach here. And Dad said, well, I'm doing evangelism back in Virginia. And the guy said, oh, don't even worry about it. Just preach the sermon you preached over there. They encourage each other to be lazy. I'm telling you what it was like on the inside. My brother, Micah, was classmates with them. Micah had classmates that were watching Will Ferrell videos, like movies. They had a headphone in their ear in the back of the classroom watching movies during Bible class. There were guys in Bible class, in my class, playing video games on their computer. There were dudes who were married. They just wanted to get out of their house. So they'd leave their apartment, they'd leave their wife, they'd go to the big old huge library they got, and they just watch UFC fights in the library. Dudes in my class wouldn't even take their books home. I'm telling you right now, you guys think that you're paying money to get preachers? You're not. I don't know how many guys I went to school with that have quit preaching. They didn't even leave school to preach. They just wanted a 2-year vacation because they had a good time. What, Caleb, all you do is talk about the big fish. Well, these guys are little fish, but I'm telling you, it's a load of nepotism, compromise, and it's just an exchanging of monies. And I will tell you this too. I'm talking to folk who are the unaffiliated. They've never been to a school of preaching. They don't care. They don't have family members that are just, hey, everybody in my family went to Freed Hardeman and we've got it in the family will. I'm talking to people who can have some honest opinion because you're not entrenched. The schools are corrupt. and you keep letting Pepperdine and Sunset and Lipscomb in the door, and they're coming in through Abilene, and they're coming in through Oklahoma, and they're coming in through Freed-Hardeman, and they're coming in through Faulkner. I haven't talked about Faulkner in a long time. Faulkner in 2015 had Jerry Rushford. He's in charge of the Pepperdine lectures. Had F. LaGard Smith, Pepperdine. And the third one I just can't think of, it might have been Jim McGuigan. Faulkner too, they're all letting the door open. Why? Money. The schools work together, they get money, and you got your head in the sand, and you are in charge of the church treasury, and you just keep giving money to the school. So here's the thing. Someone says, Caleb, if these are small fish, I'm an even smaller fish. Well, I tell you what you can do. You can stop giving your contribution until these folks straighten up. That is what is fueling this whole system, is nothing more than the American dollar. And if you stop giving your American dollars, then maybe they'll straighten up, because righteousness is not in their equation. Someone says, Caleb, I can't just stop giving. Yes, you can. Acts 11:29, the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined. You determine, in some sense, what your money goes to. And right now, your money is going to open the door, and Pepperdine is coming in. And Memphis is opening the door and letting Sunset come in through Dan Winkler. East Tennessee is opening the door, letting Pepperdine come in through Phil Sanders. And David Shannon got the door open at Freed-Hardeman, letting Pepperdine come in. He could say something. He could say something. Where is he? He could say something open and public. I'm going to go out and I am going to say this. It's a compliment to Aaron Gallagher. Aaron Gallagher is, I met personally with Aaron Gallagher before he got involved with GBN. He is very charismatic, and I'm sure he's a hard worker. Aaron Gallagher did not at all need what GBN was selling. Aaron Gallagher could have gone out on his own and just done something, and he would have gotten picked up by a number of things. But right now what he did is he got in bed with a bunch of compromisers, and now he's compromising with them. You can say what you want to. But Pepperdine comes to Edmond more ways than one, and Phil Sanders does nothing. Jeff Jenkins is fellowshipping with Orpheus, and you're about to be in the pulpit with Jeff Jenkins. So you can say what you want to, but here we are now. This is my last slide because I don't have the phone numbers up anymore. 276-806-3641, calebgrobertson@gmail.com. I love you. We got to do better, and we got to do better right now. God bless you. Keep asking, what does the Bible say?